Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism. So here's the question, because goodness knows I get a lot of these emails. Is there a path forward? Is there a way to balance compassion for both the narcissistic person and the person in the narcissistic relationship? Is that possible? Because I'm going to tell you, in my inbox, they come in a lot in comments like, you're being unkind, you're being unfair, can't you see the narcissistic person's position, they're reacting to trauma, and on and on and on. You need to be more compassionate. So how do we balance that? Let's take this one on. And again, as always, before we go on too, just a reminder for those of you who want to do the deeper dive into healing, you can go into the video notes and the link to my healing program is there. But let's talk about this. How do we balance compassion on both sides, the narcissist and the person affected by the narcissist? Here's your short answer. It's not that simple. Now, like I said, I get emails and messages of all kinds, some more nicely worded than others, from people who call me out or maybe sometimes, thank you, more gently ask, can't there be more compassion for the narcissistic people? Especially given that for many narcissistic people, they have backstories that are quite difficult. Now, I've shared this on this channel before. I've worked with many clients with narcissistic personality styles, ranging from very mild to quite severe. I worked with some of those clients for 10 years or more. And as I got to know them as people, as a therapist, and as a human being, I definitely was, trying and hopefully they experienced it as compassionate, empathic, genuine, and above all, wanted to be a safe space for them. I can also say that these clients, relative to my other clients, required a disproportionate amount of time. You got to remember, for a shrink, the session doesn't just end for us when we say time's up. We go on to keep notes, sketch out treatment plans, and honestly just sit and often think about the client and how best to help them. However, clients do and often will take the ability to contact us between sessions, and almost to a margin of 10 to 1, clients with narcissistic personalities would reach out a lot more between sessions, nights, weekends, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, my birthday. There would be anger when I could not accommodate them, when they showed up late to sessions, when they wanted a different time, when I didn't respond exactly the way they wanted. Therapists who work with narcissistic clients listen to stories of infidelities, shady, hurtful behavior, maltreatment of the narcissistic person's coworkers and family members. We try to help them connect the dots, even as we're frustrated at their repeated behavior. We also understand the why of narcissistic behavior and try to help them too. We do bring compassion because we have to. And therapists are not robots. We are human, so we also burn out. And therapists who have a history of their own personal history of narcissistic abuse, working with narcissistic clients in some cases can be triggering and destabilizing. All of that said, a key ingredient to why therapy works is compassion. Compassion was necessary, as it would be for any relationship like this, but it wasn't always easy. Listen, maybe someday AI therapists who won't have feelings and histories will be better suited to this work. But right now in 2022, we got flesh and blood therapists. And we only need to see the client for an hour or maybe even more or less often a week. It's not easy. So when the critiques come in about, can't we be more compassionate to people with narcissistic personality styles, I am left with the question of how do we find this balance of retaining compassion on both sides of the coin and not losing ourselves. I got into this work because I truly believed, and still do, that the group that wasn't getting enough compassion was the group of people being harmed by narcissistic people. The people experiencing narcissistic abuse were being told that they might have an anxiety disorder, a neurotic personality, an adjustment disorder, needed to be less rigid and learn to compromise, needed to learn to communicate, needed to stop being so sensitive, needed to account for the other person's backstory, their history, their culture. There has traditionally been very little compassion towards individuals experiencing narcissistic abuse, with their experiences just being written off as being, family problems, relationship problems, personality differences. You better believe they were personality differences. One person had a very maladaptive, problematic personality, and another one who was taking the hits as a result. It was never clear to me why there wasn't more compassion for the people experiencing the narcissistic abuse. The first tendency was to blame the people experiencing the narcissistic abuse. I sometimes wonder if it's because the people experiencing narcissistic abuse weren't as prone to self-advocacy. People would say to the people experiencing narcissistic abuse, well, if it was so bad, why didn't you just leave? But then if they did leave, then they would be shamed for breaking up a family, getting a divorce, being a quitter, or abandoning the family. So where do they turn? Or they would be told, why did you choose so badly? Didn't you see the red flags? I'm not sure if that's really useful feedback if this was a person's parent. Or they're told, survivors are told, there's two sides to every story, or what did you do to trigger them, or maybe you just weren't having enough sex or alone time with them, that kind of stuff. There was almost contempt for survivors of toxic relationships, as though they had to be the problem. I would argue we have always had actually quite a bit of compassion for narcissistic people. For example, for people with a tyrannical father, they would say, well, he raised you with discipline and a strong work ethic. Or the manipulative mother, oh, it couldn't have been easy to have been a woman in that era. Or the sullen, resentful spouse, his father wasn't that nice to him. Or the abusive boss, she's a hard-driving, success-oriented boss. You'll be glad for these years because they made you tougher. We make excuses for them, we create workarounds, and we shame anyone who struggles with them. I have no idea why this is. Maybe it's because where the people experiencing narcissistic abuse don't advocate for themselves, the narcissistic people are really good at advocating for themselves. They run the show. They're the leaders. They run the media. They have bigger platforms. And maybe, just maybe, because we wanted to believe that bullying and overpowering and dominance are good, that we had to believe that the person on the other side of that relationship had to be weak. I am a fan that everyone should be treated with compassion. But I'm also a believer, I should say, that toxic behavior, interpersonally cruel behavior, manipulative behavior have to be named. And people need to know that these behaviors are not okay, so they can give themselves permission to step away, rather than to fall into a morass of cognitive dissonance. Narcissism does its damage through behavior. The narcissistic person's gaslighting, cheating, lying, insulting, criticizing, manipulating, raging, stealing. These relationship behaviors are what cause the problems. The personality style is the gas in the tank. It's what drives these behaviors. Things like the lack of empathy, entitlement, grandiosity, egocentricity, the validation seeking, a need for dominance and control. All of that leads people to behave badly. Sadly, we also know that for a pretty substantial chunk of narcissistic people, this personality did originate from a really difficult place. Neglectful, chaotic, invalidating, unavailable, unseeing, and even at times abusive parents who never recognized their child as a human being. Ironically, those same parents also shape the children who go on to be most vulnerable to the narcissistic folks, which is why you could have a narcissistic sibling and one who gets narcissistically abused in the same family. For many years, it was as though there were two groups of folks, the narcissistic folks and the ones who endured their abuse, and a blessed third group who was neither, and I would love to visit that third group in that beautiful nirvana you live in someday. The narcissistic folks would use other people to regulate, right? They yell at people, they treat them as conveniences, treat them as sources of supply. And it seemed that as long as narcissistic folks had some people that they could abuse and get some supply from, they actually didn't bother the rest of us. Well, that doesn't seem very nice for the people stuck in those cycles. So when people come around talk to me, email me, whatever, and say, show more compassion, my response would be this: we need to have more compassion for everyone. The world is really lacking in it in these days. And my wish and my hope is that folks who have narcissistic personalities get the therapeutic support that they need and feel supported in doing the hard work of managing their personalities, of taking ownership so they can stop hurting people and find other ways of managing their frustration. I will never be able to show compassion for behavior that hurts another person, because the people who have been hurt historically haven't had advocates. Narcissistic folks have gotten their power by being in charge. The folks being hurt never really got any. Until we can have a conversation in the fields of mental health, medicine, health policy, public policy about the mental health damage caused by antagonistic and unempathic behavior, until the compassion is systemically present for both sides, then for now I'm going to overcorrect and support the survivor side. Maybe we just want to believe, like every ancient myth has had us believe, that the beast can become a prince, the raging dragon can become a house pet, the tyrannical king can become a man of the people. Those myths have been around forever because that has always been the fantasy, that the most antagonistic will find their hearts just like the Grinch did and be kind. Is it likely to happen? No. The more power a narcissistic person has, the less likely it is to happen. Survivors need to get out first. They need to find safety. They need to disengage. They need to get away from being manipulated and confused, be allowed to find their own voices and become independent and autonomous. Doesn't mean they have to leave the relationship, but they need to be able to have that journey. When that happens, when the survivors can find their sovereignty and their safety, only then is it right to even ask them to start digging into finding compassion for the narcissistic folks in their lives. Survivors must practice self-compassion first. Until then, it keeps survivors stuck, imprisoned, and forever serving as a source of supply for the narcissistic person and justifying the whole mess to break the cycle of cognitive dissonance. Compassion is always good, but not compassion in the service of justifying another person's bad behavior. Thanks again.